I'm Ron Whitten, one of the architects of Erin Hills Golf Course. Joining me today is University of Wisconsin geology professor Luke Zoot. Together, we'll explore the unique geological history of Wisconsin's Kettle Moraine region and discuss how the landforms left by glaciers 10,000 years ago defined the landscape of what would become a championship course for the ages, Erin Hills.
So the river now is to the north edge of our golf course.
Yep.
This property that a golf course is on, that was part of the glacier that receded back?
Yeah, so at an earlier time, this was all under the glacier. The glacier would have been, thousands of feet above us with ice. As it's receding back, it's leaving big chunks of ice in front of it, and it gets to basically the position of the ash pin and it stops for a while. And as it stopped here, water's coming out of the front of the glacier from melting. Some of that water is basically flowing over the top of this chunks of ice that are left out of here, and it's carrying sediment, and it's putting sediment on top of the ice that's in front. We call it dead ice because it's not moving anymore. It's just sort of chunks of stagnant ice that are sitting there. It starts filling up this area out front with sediment. Eventually it builds up enough sediment where the water can't keep flowing that way, and it starts flowing down the front of the glacier to the west. Now later, the ice sort of pulls back, and what happens is all the sediment that buried all this dead ice out in front, the ice starts to melt. And when the ice melts, it leaves the areas that have only a little bit of ice become large hills, and areas that had a lot of ice become sort of kettle deposits. It's sort of akin to if you took a balloon and you put it in a sandbox, and then you buried it, and then you stuck a pin in and you popped the balloon. Well, the area that had the balloon would be a depression. And that's what all these depressions are. They're the areas that had the ice, and instead of a balloon, they had ice that melted, and that's what caused the low spots.
These little mounds that we see out here, and I say little in terms of their dimensions compared to a huge glacier, so those are just hills or mounds formed by this process that you've described. Is that right?
That's right. So moraines and drumlins are formed in slightly different ways. These are what you would call kettles, though. These are like stereotypical kettles. This is exactly what you want to see. It makes good golfing terrain. And that process of forming these depressions, the depressions themselves are what's called the kettles. You'd characterize the whole area as something called hummocky topography. And hummocky topography means this sort of bumpy topography that we see around that is characteristic of kettles, and kettles are formed by this buried ice. So if you see this type of terrain where it's this real bumpy, hummocky stuff, you know that there was at one point a lot of buried ice that then got melted out.
Look, this is the second green, another one of those really unusual landforms. When we laid out this course, our mantra was landforms are king. We felt like it just had to be used as a golf green. It was just this dome sitting out in an empty field, and all we did was slice the top of the dome off to make a green. We actually sliced twice after the U.S. Women's Amateur. It was determined it just wasn't big enough. It was only about 1,800 square feet, so we dropped it another, I think 18 inches, and it's now almost 4,000 square feet.
It's unique in the sense that around it, it's surrounded by low areas. And so probably what this started out as is actually a area that had a bowl in the surface, and that sediment filled in the bowl. It was almost like a lake. And then it sat there, and as all the ice around it that kind of looked like a donut melted, the bowl it went from sort of an upside down cone to a right side up cone. And then over time it sort of rounded itself off, leaving it this sort of mound in the center of this lower area. But it was this topographic inversion that formed it. It's really interesting that you say landforms are king, because it's a really good way to sort of design a course like this, in my opinion, when you have this sort of wealth of landforms and different shape topography around here that you can work with. It probably makes designing the course a lot more difficult, but ends up with quite an interesting course in the end.
The thrill of coming around that corner and seeing this little eggshell green, as it was known, that kind of set the tone for Erin Hills. Luke, if there's one hole out here that I think represents the true hummocky, kettle-y sort of nature that you're talking about, it's this 12th hole, which is a par 4 that plays uphill and then downhill, and it twists and it turns, and I think every golfer who comes out here is just in awe of this natural topography. Can you guesstimate how this particular land formation or formations were formed?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to look at a map, which is how we identify a lot of these regions, that had like the topography outlined on it, this would be sort of characteristic of this hummocky topography I've been talking about. The high ridges are the hummocks and the low areas the kettle. Now, initially, probably right as this landscape was forming, those would have been a lot more peaked than you can see right now. They would have had sort of real sharp edges. There'd obviously be no vegetation. And then over time, what would happen, and this would happen over a relatively short time, those peaks and those sharp edges would pretty quickly diffuse into this sort of rolling topography we're seeing right now. And what we're seeing now is sort of a snapshot in time. Happens to be a good snapshot in time where you can see a lot of this topographic relief, but nonetheless, it's still a snapshot in time.